Alright, time for another draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com also. Video presentation. So I'll do a response video to a video, it's only a half hour, where Sabine Hossenfelder and Matt O'Dowd have a conversation about what's wrong with their physics. And okay, so O'Dowd is on the side that relativity is broken and quantum mechanics is fine. And Sabine Hossenfelder is more of a quantum mechanics needs a reboot, and relativity is just fine. You know, I would argue both theories are garbage, and that's why the two can't be converted in a unifying theory, is because their incompatibility is their garbage doesn't. Garbage plus garbage equals something less than garbage. It doesn't improve garbage to be mixed with garbage. Yes. Anyway, so there is duplicity everywhere here. So O'Dowd does all these videos, just these PBS videos, all this woo crap, wormholes, entanglement. You might as well say spirituality. It's all just a religious story. And Sabine Hossenfelder keeps claiming she cares about the foundations of physics, and she never really discusses anything foundational in the sense of anything like the premises and axioms of physics that are garbage, frankly. She'll never explain how levers work, or where they conserve momentum, any kind of that kind of discussion. She overtly says she's not interested in a unification theory anyway. She doesn't think, that all of the statements or axioms should be able to be fit into one model, and that model be functional and working. She doesn't believe that the universe is mechanical, in other words, because obviously a mechanical universe can be modeled and everything will mechanically fit, like a car or something. Okay, it'll all work just fine. So she has a hostility to anything called a unification or any kind of final solution in terms of a description of the mechanical reality. Now, in this process, she actually says, there was something, maybe they missed something in the origins of quantum mechanics, and that's why it's broken. It's that it needs a rethink. Some of those axioms may be wrong, as she didn't say those exact words, but pretty much that's what she was saying. But she will not listen to anybody's arguments, so it doesn't make any difference. There's no point in saying you may have wrong axioms when you won't listen to the right ones. So they're going to talk about the double slit experiment, which is the cause of the effect, in the sense that there would be no quantum mechanics if it wasn't for this stupid experiment that they interpret in this bizarre and silly way, and then they smeared Dirac on top of it, and Pauli and all of this other abstract mathematics, Schrodinger's equation, which Schrodinger himself said isn't what you're making it into, and it's just all Schrodinger basically made the cat story up to make fun of quantum mechanics, to mock it as nonsense. Anyway, so the simple truth is the experiment is easily understood as a mechanical system. It does very mechanical things. You move certain things happen to the pattern. They make it all mysterious and wooey, and it's not. It's really mechanically simple. And nobody can see that because they've set up the premise for you to believe things, that aren't true. That they'll claim they've done experiments, that they've tested things that they have not tested. So they'll say they detected something, or they, demonstrated something, and it really hasn't been demonstrated. So I will go through some of that. Now, this is going to be a response video to a previous video I've done a couple of times, where I go through all of the arguments demonstrating how everything they say about this double slit experiment is nonsense, going all the way back to Young and his experiments, And the fact is, it doesn't work mathematically. You can't assume waves. You can't assume photons go through and they're all affected the same way and they're all randomized. None of that happens, and it's easy to demonstrate that none of that happens, and that this has nothing to do with anything really called interference. Photons do not interact with photons, as is proven by every experiment ever conducted. And the truth is that all you're doing is creating a very simple pattern, on-off. It's the simplest pattern in the universe, an on-off pattern. And there's no reason to declare that it's absolutely been proven that photons are some kind of wave in some kind of medium, because they're not. All right, so with that premise, he's going to talk about the measurement problem, okay, which they are saying has something to do with this experiment. And, you know, this idea of, I could argue that this is sort of the Schrodinger cat argument, this measurement idea, and the arbitrary nature of even the description of what a measurement would actually be. So there is this concept that if we take a photograph of something, that we've forced it to turn into real stuff. So the electrons and protons can no longer be doing fudgy stuff because I took a picture of them and there's no fuzz in the picture. So whenever we take this picture, you know, the idea of what a picture is just a reflection of photons off of a substance. So, I mean, obviously, taking a picture, you don't have to have film in the camera. The picture still got taken. So everything had to get de-entangled. You know, the electrons and protons can't sit there and say, oh, I'm going to stay wooey because he doesn't have film in his camera. They can't do any of that, right? So obviously this idea that something de-entangles because we're looking is silly. And the idea that, yes, a measurement is merely just a record of what took place. So you can form or create that record in lots of different ways. But what you can do is you can know that everything is being recorded by the force of gravity, that there are forces in the universe that are taking your picture, so to speak, all the time. Now, there's no film in the camera, but they're hitting you with a force, and you're reflecting every millisecond. Right now, I'm changing the universe because of my presence. If I wasn't here, the stuff in the background would be sending photons in different places to different directions with different colors, different frequencies. So I'm changing the universe by just existing and occupying this space and reflecting the universe. That's an absolute fact. And so all of my substance has to be constantly de-entangled. It can't be in some amorphous place. It can't not know its position because essentially it's being photographed by the universe all the time. There's no amount of time where my atoms are given the opportunity to do something in private. There's no private time for an atom or an electron or a proton. It's in a constant bombardment, a field of constant bombardment. It doesn't have any time to do any wooey, I'm going to go to Saturn. I'm going to pretend I have some possibility of going to Saturn. It's all just such garbage physics. It's a silly religion. It's very disappointing that people who pretend to care about science and the truth and being, you know, above being silly religious kooks wallow in this crappy, ignorant science presented by these talking heads, these personalities.
Very bottom of quantum mechanics that defy intuition.
So this stupid intuition word, what they're saying is defy reasonable explanation for what we know is that, okay, I throw this up, it comes back down. It's hard. It doesn't automatically go weak on it. It doesn't turn invisible. It doesn't do this. It doesn't. Yes, there's a ton of rules that we have observed, and they're saying those rules don't apply to this tiny universe we can't see. So they're just coincidentally, the universe we can't see has a ton of magic in it. And he even uses that terminology when describing his college days, that what he was seeking was magic.
And I think at the heart of that is the measurement problem. Would you maybe agree?
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of other things that people like to talk about, like entanglement. And I'm always like, I'm not bothered by entanglement.
So it's just so hilarious. I'm not bothered by some concept that these silly particles communicate with each other. The tiniest things in the universe have ESP. That doesn't bother me as a thought or an idea. Amazing. And then she, and because she has her own silly conclusion, which is frankly girly as you get, where she uses some term like superdeterminism, that, well, the universe is just tricking us and it knows how to trick us. Some kind of nonsense like that. Like it's just built in that everything does what it's going to do, and everything knew what everything else was going to do ahead of time, because everything that was going to happen anyway. Some kind of convoluted goop as an explanation, where she's really just saying, oh, it's right-hand glove and left-hand glove. I mean, she's not a believer in entanglement in their sense of that word, which is a true actual event where one thing completely changes something else's action and performance at insane distances.
We can deal with entanglement. We know what it is. We can describe it mathematically.
So even that is just nonsense. They don't describe anything mathematically. They just draw a formula and say, yes, the formula says so, but there's no test for any of it. So don't be fooled. When they say we can do something mathematically, it's bullshit. And this is from a silly woman who wrote a book saying Lost in Math, and she'll defend silly, convoluted nonsense mathematics that produces no explicit truth.
But the measurement
No testable truth, frankly.
process, we just don't know what it is. Like, we can't even say what a measurement is. Like, so it's kind of embarrassing, really.
Yeah, it's nonsense. It's just absolute nonsense, because this whole idea of measuring, okay, just has to do with, first you have to have a time to measure it, right? Because it's constantly, the universe constantly changing. So how exactly do I measure something that's constantly moving? All kinds of ideas that just break the very concept of there being any notion that this has anything to do with frickin' measuring something. It has to do with the fact that, yes, we can't see it. It ends up hitting a wall, and then, frankly, it's that simple. Frankly, if we just paid attention to what it does, we could draw the straight lines. It's all just straight lines. The universe is made out of motion and straight lines. It's very Newtonian. It's very easy. And they've just made it unnecessarily convoluted and complex.
And so the interesting thing about the measurement problem is that we're getting there, like, experimentally.
So she says we're getting there experimentally, and there's through what mechanism? I can describe exactly how they can't even describe the simplest experiments honestly. So you have this very simple experiment. You just shine light through a slit. They can't describe this honestly. They can't show you exactly what happens and then say this is what actually happens, and show you the correlations, because it would demonstrate that it has nothing to do with what they're claiming. They're claiming this, something goes through this opening, and they're saying a whole bunch of crap happens that doesn't happen. A really simple thing happens. A very easy to dissect thing happens. So they can't describe an experiment as simple as shining a light through an aperture. These are experiments that Newton did. He didn't have any explanation for them because, frankly, Newton couldn't understand tiny particles and all of the nuances of what something, electrons vibrating on a surface, all that kind of, he can't do that. But anyway, continuing.
So maybe to aid the audience, we should explain what the measurement problem is.
Okay.
So it's just kind of funny because the two slit was never called the measurement problem. So this is just kind of funny.
So you take some particles, it could be photons, electrons, whatever, and
and they're saying they all behave the same way. They don't. Okay, electrons are charged. You can't even shoot them through slits because the slits have to have a charge on them. So there's no way to do the experiment with electrons. They do some other experiment and pretend it's the same experiment. So they'll shoot, electrons at a crystal at an angle, and they'll call that a slit experiment. I mean, it's ridiculously dishonest.
throw them at a wall, very thin wall, and then you cut two slits, and
Thin wall. So why did he even say something that ridiculous? It doesn't matter what the wall is. Thin wall. The wall has nothing to do. You can make it out of bricks. You make it out of tissue paper. It doesn't matter. It just has to stop photons or electrons or whatever you're shooting. But again, you can't shoot electrons. They're charged. Of course, they're going to be affected when they go by a surface. It's ridiculous.
Spec, you see dots on a wall, and then you cut two slits in the wall, and you keep throwing. Some of the particles will go through the wall, and you have a screen on the other side.
So obviously, Young didn't make the wall out of some tissue paper. No, he didn't do anything like that. He cut two slits in a very opaque surface. Okay, so only the light could go through the two openings. That's the only light that went through. That's the slit experiment.
Okay, so you see dots where your particles land on the other side, and you would expect maybe some to pile up because they went through one slit, some to pile up because they went through...
So this is the classic bullshit, right? So he's saying some to pile up over here, and he's actually pile up over there. The experiment is less than 1 millimeter wide, and none of the photons that aren't going to be fringe photons are spreading. They're going straight. It's a laser beam. You're shooting a laser beam at the slits. Most 94% of the light will go right to that dot in the center. And at best, you could expect 1 millimeter difference in the pattern. So the pattern's going to be maybe a foot across, and there's just going to be 1 millimeter difference between the two. So if I put one slit, the pattern's going to be here. I close that slit and open the other slit, the pattern's going to be exactly in the same place. Less than 1 millimeter difference in the two patterns. That's the absolute fact. There's no over there and over there for the light that goes straight through.
With the other slit, that's not what we see. At least for a quantum particle, what we see...
So quantum particle doesn't mean a damn thing. The quantum particle doesn't do any of this nonsense. And what we see, okay, clearly in the single slit, which doesn't duplicate water at all, is a ton of patterns. So I can do a single slit and have 70 or 80 of these fringes. Maybe 100. Professor Lewin has overtly stated that it's ridiculous to say this is a different phenomenon. This is diffraction and this is interference. It's ridiculous. Now he believes in silly Huygens nonsense, but whatever. The point is that the patterns are being created by the same phenomena, the same mechanics. They are not being created by different mechanics. So clearly there's no correlation between a single water wave making a fringe pattern. It doesn't happen. So photons are doing something distinctly different. And they're doing it with a single slit, where there's no opportunity for two waves to come out of that single slit. Two waves that are going to interfere with each other. There are no two waves.
Is as you throw more and more particles, they form these bands we call interference bands.
Right, and they're fringes, and that's all they are. So again, they call them interference. They're assuming it. They're not proving it. They're not demonstrating that has anything to do with interference. And there's plenty of experiments, as I explained in the other video, that I'll link in the description, in the primary video. You can do radar experiments and radio experiments and demonstrate that you can send the energy in opposing directions to an antenna and create the same exact fringe pattern, all right, and the photons never have an opportunity to interfere with each other. They never cross paths.
That don't make any sense on the surface, but they look awfully like what would happen if a wave passed through those two slits.
So it's only an incidental, yes, coincidentally, water waves with a double slit will create fringes. Okay, but they don't match. There's no double maxima. Lots of things aren't going to match. Waves are going up and down. It's turning on and off. It's not happening in the photon experiment. So this tiny similarity they've turned into an absolute, inescapable, you must assume that it's exactly the same phenomenon when it's not anything like the same phenomenon. It's not the same mechanics at all. It's all about surfaces with photons. Photons are very tiny. They go by a surface. The electrons are moving. They hit the electrons. They change their direction. The simplest explanation. That can mechanically work. You can simulate it. You can create motion on a surface, have a bunch of elements of a photon go through the slit, be only the ones on the surface. That's why 90% of the light goes straight through, is because the fringes, or all the fringe pattern, is being made by photons that went near the surface. The surface is active with electrons. The electrons change their momentum. When they change their momentum by getting hit by pieces of the photon, they send those pieces to the surface. And the fact is, there's a 50-50 chance that they're going to be in phase or out of phase. If they're out of phase, no photon that you can see. If they're in phase, photon you see.
It's the wave would come out the other side, producing ripples that would interfere with themselves, build up or die away, and you would get this lovely pattern.
It's not very lovely. Frankly, it's just so irrelevant. And again, you can sit there and mechanically watch it happen. You can make the slit opening bigger or smaller, and you can see it change the pattern. And you can understand the mathematics that works just measures the difference between the two surfaces. It just says how far apart are those two surfaces. It's the surfaces that cause the phenomenon. The single slit experiment should be called the two surface experiment. The double slit should be called the four surface experiment. And it makes perfectly good sense because the four surfaces create two patterns. You have an envelope pattern representing the single slit pattern, and then you have these little tiny dots. And all I have to do to make these dots smaller, that is more per fringe, is I just make this distance between this widest distance, I just make the farthest distance between two surfaces larger and larger, and I make those little dots smaller and smaller. And I can do the inverse by making the slits narrower and narrower, and I can make this envelope pattern bigger and bigger.
On the wall, but this happens even if you throw, say, electrons one electron at a time.
Okay, so just a bullshit statement. I'm just saying, honest, they've never done any electron experiment with slits because, frankly, it's impossible. Electrons are charged. You would have every expectation that the closer to the surface the electron is, the more it's going to be deflected.
Okay, so the electrons don't know about each other, and the standard interpretation is these days is that little speck of matter is simultaneously passing through both of these slits.
So a silly explanation, just full of idiotic woo. So they talk about intuition and Newton and mechanics, and they say, okay, if somebody suggested this 250 years ago, they would just be laughed out of science. I mean, this is just coming up with a complete nonsensical explanation. Why would you resort to something so silly when you know the whole universe has this vector thing happening all over the place? Newton explained rainbows by drawing straight line vectors, okay? Not wooey lines.
Reaching the screen not as a particle, but as this thing we call a wave function, so a probability distribution.
Yes, just complete nonsense. Doesn't happen. All the photons don't behave the same way, which is clearly illustrated. Again, they don't point this out, but in water waves, the energy is distributed over the entire surface. In these photon and electron experiments, the energy is focused at a tiny location at 90%. In the single slit, 97, I think it is, percent of the light hits right here in the center. 97%, right here, right in this little spot. It's so bright that it almost wipes out the rest of the pattern. You almost can't see the pattern because the bright spot is so bright. Demonstrating this doesn't happen to every photon. Demonstrating that Feynman's nonsense that every single photon is randomized by this magical opening is idiotic. It's worse than stupid.
Of where that electron might be if you were to look. Okay, so at the final screen you look and
they're calling the final screen looking, and it's not. It's just recording. It's just something saying, I've changed the universe. Something happened. It changed the universe. Something changed, and we noticed the change. Obviously, there's a ton of changes that took place that we didn't notice. So they're just saying, oh, well, it's a measurement when we notice the change. And it's not a measurement when we don't notice the change. Too silly.
The electron appears here, or appears here, or appears here.
So obviously it couldn't get to the surface without being bombarded by a ton of energy. All kinds of photons are hitting the electron, all kinds of everything's hitting it. There's no possibility that it could remain in any amorphous state and travel any distance whatsoever. It's not realistic. It's impossible. Not just implausible, it's impossible. With the facts we already know about the universe.
The pattern built up is this wavy distribution that...
So it doesn't have any wavy distributionness to it. It's very explicit. You can account for every part of it. You can even see pattern created in the other dimensions because of the shape of the slit. There's also a pattern going up and down if you really look for it. So obviously if you have a square opening, you can create pattern in both directions. If you have a round opening, you can create rings that are exactly the same fringe pattern, just in ring form. I mean, this is just a mechanical event. It has no woo in it.
Seems to only make sense if the electron was a wave passing through and then we say collapse.
So it's just idiotic, right? These tiny, discrete, little tiny things in the universe somehow spread across an entire 1 millimeter surface and go through somehow. Their essence goes through both slits or some not. It's just nonsense.
Into a single point particle at the screen, at the measurement.
All right, so this, I'm just saying, just recognize how silly that explanation is. So all I have to do is, if you understand a photon could be this simple, all right, if you like, you have to accept that there's, a photon could just be stuff at a frequency. That defines the photon. You have an object separated by a distance moving the speed of light in a direction, and the fact is that will describe the event that is a photon. Red light would be further apart, blue light is closer together in terms of where the particles are in space. So they were launched off a surface at a timed event, and they have a distance between each other. And it makes perfectly good sense to recognize that's what a photon is, because it fits for radio wave. You have bits that are very far apart, but a billion of them. You have a billion bits here, and then a billion bits here, and a billion bits here. And that description absolutely works. And the key point is that these little bits are just pieces of mass with a velocity, and it's all the same. And all you can change is the speed at which you hit something. So the idea is that a high frequency photon doesn't have any intrinsic extra energy. It just has the ability to knock something over better, because it's going to hit it, and it's not going to be able to elastically react and rebalance and then get hit again and then rebalance and then get hit again and rebalance. And instead, all the momentum is going to be hit while the object is still moving. You're going to keep adding velocity to the object. If I hit it slowly, I don't add velocity because the electron slows down and then goes back because it's elastic. So obviously the quicker I expose it to the amount of energy, the more likely it is it tips over, that it gains velocity from the interaction. That simple explanation fixes all of this. It fixes the ultraviolet catastrophe. It explains Einstein's observations about the quantization of light. It works perfectly. It fits. The model works. And they won't even listen to it. Fact. You can't humiliate them to this conversation.
So the measurement problem is that how can the electron be in this sort of fuzzy state of a probability space, a wave function, all the way up until we look at it?
Right, so there's no we look at it, okay? There's just it encounters a surface and it either is absorbed or reflected. That's all that really takes place, is it encounters electrons, the electrons move in a specific way, and we detect it, the electricity, frankly, if we're detecting the absorption, and if it reflects, we're just going to get the energy back in some form. Could be a higher or lower frequency.
And then suddenly resolve itself into one position. Okay, that's the double slit experiment.
Right, so it's just too ridiculous that everything is in some non-existent real state. There's all this complex fields affecting everything, all this complexity, and somehow, though, in the end, it behaves as if it was a dead straight arrow shot. So even though it's mathematically describable as direct frickin' vectors, straight line vectors, they're going to pretend there's some reason to think it didn't obey straight line vector physics. And there is no reason to believe that, unless you're a religious kook. Mouse, find the button.
Very, very crudely told.
Yeah, terribly told, frankly, and that's how it's always told, this mushy, none of this. They don't show it, they don't describe it accurately. Single slit, two surfaces, create fringe pattern. You draw lines from the two surfaces. That's the mathematics that works. And you create in-phase and out-of-phase locations, clearly indicating that whatever's coming off of those two surfaces can be either in phase or out of phase. Duh!
So can you say more about why it's weird that the electron would do that on measurement?
Yeah, so there are two parts to this weirdness. One is what Einstein already worried about. So if you have this wave of the electron which goes through both slits.
So there's no weirdness. I'm just saying there's the output is very simple. It's a on-off pattern, and then it has a double maxima. It has little features. It has, the double slit. Okay, right here. This will always be an odd number of fringes inside of this pattern. So it'll always be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Always an odd number. It has distinct features. These features will always be 1/2 of that number plus 1. 6. If I add up 2 of these fringes, I get the number 6, and this will be a 5. Every time. That will work. It has these regular features that make it mechanically understandable. The fact is, the envelope pattern is being created by the smallest distance between two surfaces, and the little tiny dots are being created by the largest distance between two surfaces. That's what the facts indicate. And not a single one of these talking head mush purveyors will ever deal with that argument. That this is an easily dissected experiment if you go in without expecting it to be a wooey answer. If you don't hear their nonsense first and get confused, this is obvious.
It spreads out towards the screen, But then as you...
So again, nothing's spreading out. We're using laser beams now in the modern era. The photons have a very direct path, and clearly some percentage of the photons, and it's always a pretty small percentage, are being cast in these extreme directions. Now, they've never even tested their wave theory. So they've never even done an experiment where they put two photographic films on the two sides of the experiment, right? Not in front, but on the sides. Because by their wave theory, there should be pattern here and there should be pattern here. Never done. They've never tested their theory. Okay, they've just accepted it, loved it, petted it, cared for it, and it's less than a pet rock. It's a pet turd.
As said, like when we actually look where the electron is, it's only in one place. So somehow the wave function needs to...
So again, the wave function, some idea that you're supposed to believe that there is something out there. And so I reflect a photon, that somehow the photon is going to Saturn, it's going across the room, it's going over there, it's going behind me, it's going everywhere with some probability. No impossibilities, just some probability. All right, and all of that is retracted when it decides to go to one place. That somehow all the motion in that direction, all the work it did, it just undoes the work. Absolute nonsense. Obviously, it didn't travel, it didn't interact, it didn't do anything in all those other directions. It only interacted with the universe in this direction. The fact is, the photon, every photon that travels through the atmosphere, is a certain number of them are going to hit oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen atoms. And the fact is, they're going to interact with that atom and be very tiny, in very subtle ways, affected in tiny, tiny amounts. And those effects or Compton scattering can be detected. There will be a change in the photon. And this is really understandable in the cosmological sense of they have this idea of redshift and this stupid notion that somehow the universe is expanding, when the simple explanation is no, it isn't. You're just expanding the frequency of photons because, frankly, there's still a bunch of atoms in the empty space. And every time one of those, anytime anything interacts with those atoms, it's going to be in some way or other affected. Photons are changed by the experience. You can't change photons. You can't change things going in all kinds of directions and then undo the changes you made to make one path of change. You can't do any of that.
Go away, like very suddenly, on the entire screen, and that's not local. So it has to happen instantaneously everywhere, which is faster than the speed of light.
Right. This is just so silly, right? I mean, this idea that all of these functions are happening on this micro-universe scale, when we know that all of these functions, magnetism, electricity, even light, are incredibly reliable. They always do the same thing. They always produce reliable outcomes and results. They are not doing any of this woo physics.
And this is what Einstein called a spooky action at a distance. Because if you just look at the mathematics...
So Einstein, obviously, in spite of the fact that he created a spooky action at a distance theory for gravity, that is no accountable mechanical system. He just said there's a woo space, and the woo space is bent. I mean, it's, you know... Spooky woo space is not good physics, and it certainly shouldn't give you the right to call somebody else's made-up phantasmagorical nonsense explanation spooky, because frankly Einstein's relativity is spooky space.
It just goes snap and it's in one point. How's that supposed to happen? We don't know the process.
It doesn't happen. You don't need to know the process because it doesn't happen. It's ridiculous. Photons are tiny, discrete particles. Well, they're not that tiny, frankly. Their polarization is, 500 atoms across. So they're it could be argued that the bits of energy are traveling in parallel lines. Okay, and those parallel lines add up to a substantial amount of distance. So when you create a photon on a surface, what you're really doing is pushing electrons. So you hit the first atom, it pushes an electron, gives it some momentum. You hit it a second time, it gives it more momentum. You hit it a third time in the sense it's not the same electron, it's just the pressure of electrons moving through atoms, which is exactly what electricity is. Electricity is giving electrons momentum, pushing them from one atom to the next atom, and the higher the speed you get it at, the more efficient it is in terms of preserving the energy in one direction. And that's what high frequency light can do and low frequency can't.
So we have the mathematics, which actually just
so again, the word mathematics, they have silly formulas. They never ever, I've never seen any of them ever apply to any real experiment. So show me the video where they actually calculate anything real. They just take a big formula and turn it into a small formula. They never calculate anything. And again, go ahead and calculate what the kinetic energy of a rocket exhaust is. Is that a calculation going to do you any good? Does it mean anything in reality? No, it means absolutely nothing, because the only thing that's going to move the frickin' rocket is the momentum of that exhaust. And that's the absolute fact. The momentum is the only thing that's real. The kinetic energy is absolute, made up, fable, holy ghost, religious nonsense.
They snap, basically. But is that what is physically really going on? And the other thing...
Yeah, obviously, everybody should be saying, I'm not going to bet my house on it. I don't think I'll bet my goldfish on it, frankly. I'm not going to bet the dirt on the bottom of my sneaker. There's nothing I would bet on the theory that that's accurate, that that actually happens, that energy goes everywhere and then it collapses into one little... No, none of that crap happens.
The thing that's weird about it is that what happens...
What's weird is that people buy this nonsense, that they didn't have my reaction. When I first heard it, I said, well, after I threw up, I said, fuck you. This is ridiculous. You're going to tell me this is the truth, this nonsense fable? The photon went in, it came back out, and then went around the other corner. And then it called up its friend and said, where should I go? Where should I go? I don't know where to go. No, none of that fucking crap happened.
Depends on what you look at, because with the double slit, as Matt just...
So again, we know energy is constantly moving through the universe. It's going from one object to another object to another object to another object to another. It's constantly on the move, and there's a whole pile of universe taking place, a whole giant hunk of it. The real universe is this tiny little universe where electrons and protons are swimming in the empty space and being bombarded by force. Okay, whatever you think force is. I'm saying force is little tiny particles, but whatever. And that when you arrange them in a frequency, they're a photon. And when they're not arranged, they're not a photon. But the energy is always there, always bombarding everything. That tiny universe we can't see, but that's the only real universe. That's the only place that actual events actually happen. I don't do any of this. Electrons and protons do it. Atoms do it, okay? All of the elemental pieces have to decide to do it. They are the ones being forced to do it. They are being forced by forces to do this. And it's just, the scale is insane. Trillions and trillions of interactions for one tiny gesture, one little tiny thing I do. Trillions of events. Trillions! And because of our distance from that real universe, because we are such slow-moving objects in such a big, clunky universe, we don't realize that, no, we're just a manifestation of the functions in that universe. That's the only universe where anything actually happens. And physicists can't even get that right.
Said, if you have only one slit, you don't get this interference.
So, of course you do. So this is, the whole thing is so ridiculous. You do if you use electrons, you do if you use photons. Of course you get a pattern, because the surfaces are causing it. It's two surfaces. It's not two openings. It's two surfaces. The damn fucking surfaces are the entire cause of the effect. The surfaces are moving objects. The surfaces inside. Oh, here's a flat surface. No, there's no such thing in that little universe. The little universe says, here's a bunch of electrons. And the electrons are jiggling constantly. That's the real surface. This is what the photon is seeing, okay? It's heading for the slit. It sees this, all right? And the fact is, oh, I got my head through, but my tail got whacked. The fact is, it can't get through without getting whacked by some part of that surface if it's heading next to the surface. So the photons that go next to the surface get whacked. And it makes perfectly good sense for Newton's argument that you make the aperture smaller and smaller, and then the percentage of photons that have to go near the surface goes way the fuck up. So the smaller you make the opening, the more likely it is the photon's going to get fringed. The more likely it's going to interfere with the surface, because there isn't any place where it can go where there's no surface. Duh! I can't believe I have to make these arguments over and over for fucking years. Almost decades. Because you people are belligerently ignorant morons. Lying, scummy, dishonest fucktards.
Pattern. You just get a pile of, in one place, basically. It's one bump. So that brings up the question.
I mean, these 300, whatever it is, there's 300 physicists in the world, let's say, at any one day. 300, and they get to tell you what the truth is. These preachers, these fucking bishops, these fucking goddamn morons are going to tell you what the truth is, and you buy it. You don't see it, they don't prove it, they don't show you, and yet you say, oh yeah, I like that. I'm going to get me one of them quantum cards.
Like, what happens if you know which of the slits the
quantum garbage disposal? Yeah, it's really cool. Tunnels the garbage into another dimension.
Particle went through, and the answer is the interference pattern goes away. And
so again, nonsense. The experiments don't demonstrate that. This doesn't happen. This is just a lie. Okay, so what you can make happen is when this pattern is happening, it's really a composite pattern. So when two sources land in a location, they do create a photon. And when the other two sources land, they do create a photon. And it's when all four sources land, that's when you have one of these really bright spots. But the spot next to it isn't off. There's no completely off. All right. In this section, the two close surfaces are still in phase. So this whole blob is actually two source photons. And it's just that the two outside surfaces are also in phase, and that's making the spots. So it's a composite image. So if you film it actually honestly, there's no such thing as light plus light equals dark. None of that crap happens. So again, it's all so dishonest. No detector experiments were ever done, and they certainly never tested this idea, okay, that they can change what light gets to a location by covering a surface. They can't change it.
Brings up the following problem.
I mean, you're obviously eliminating surfaces. You're eliminating sources of photons. So if you cover one of the slits, you've obviously changed how many photons, how many elements of a photon can make the new photon. I mean, what's happening is photons are going in, they're getting broken, and then the surface is remaking them out of pieces from each surface. All you need to do is recreate the frequency. This simple frequency is all you're trying to create. So I could have this dot come off of this surface, this surface, and this dot could be off of this surface, and then this dot could be off of this surface again. I've made a photon. It's not the same photon that went through the slits, but it's a photon because it's going to land with the right frequency and the right polarization.
Which is, how does the particle know that you will measure which slit it wants to go through before it gets there, because it needs to get on the way. Like, it needs to decide whether to...
She just says it's instantaneous, so you just concede that, well, there's no decision. It's just some magical event that takes place. There's no process of deciding. There's no mechanism to create any interaction that would be called a decision. There's no multiple reflexes that have to be hit. There's not multiple events that have to take place. None of that is in this environment. So of course it's impossible that the photon knows ahead of time that you're going to measure it. It's ridiculous. And actually that's her theory, though. That's super determinism. Somehow the universe already has it built in that these things will happen, so somehow they have to happen because it's already built in that they'll happen. It's already built in that they'll happen, but none of the players know it's going to happen. They don't know what's coming until it arrives.
Aim at both slits and then interfere with itself.
So interfere with itself again. It's just such... it's so gobbledygooky, silly, spooky, crazy action. That's crazy action. It's not just spooky action. It's nutty, silly, crazy, fucktarded action. Why do people believe this horse shit without being given even an indication that this didn't come out of a horse's Where is your evidence that there's some good reason to believe any of this nonsense, these nonsense interpretations? Where is the evidence to believe them? They're silly nonsense description without even drawing the patterns.
But you not do that because you will look at it. Like, so that, for me, this is like the weirdest part. Like, how does the particle know that you will sit there and look at it?
So now they just argue this superdeterminism nonsense, so I'll just call it a video because now the subject's over. I mean, there's no rational conversation about the simplicity of fringes, the fact that it is just an on-off pattern. The fact is you could imagine I could take things from two sources, two distances, and we could say that they're based on their length, they are a color, blue-red. And I throw blue-red from both of them. And the fact is that you'll have a blue and a red that'll match, or a red and a red, And it's a 50-50 chance. That's all that can happen. There's a 50-50 chance that the two things hit the surface with red-red, or blue-blue, and blue-red, or red-blue. So you're just saying that just pick one, and you say 50-50 chance. And it's a 50-50 chance that the bits of the photon that you're sending to these different locations are in phase or out of phase. There's this place where you're going, it's getting more and more, it's in phase. Now it's more out of phase. Now it's more in phase. Now it's more out of phase. It's a 50-50 chance.
And that question is open to the audience.
No, it's not open to anybody. You won't have a conversation with anybody but your elitist pals, the people you've said are entitled to speak, and that's it. Okay, nobody else can contribute to any physics conversation. If you attempt to involve yourself in the conversation, they will shut you up. They'll kick you out of the forum. They'll force you out of Wikipedia. They won't allow you to make any statements whatsoever that in any way offend their God. It's just a religion. It's run as an inquisitional religion, and it will kill anything that tries to say anything else is real. It won't allow it.
That's where we've been stuck for 100 years.
Yes, you're stuck because your physics is garbage, and it started with Leibniz's silly mv squared, okay? That was your first huge mistake, and you're never going to get over it, frankly. You ruined everything because you have a fabulistic notion of reality. You think it takes 25 times the fuel to move something 5 times as fast, and it's ridiculously stupid. All right, enough of a video. So again, all of these arguments are made in a more polite and ordered way in the other video, the main video, on the subject of the double slit. And I point out it should be viewed on a round surface, and I point out that the fringes get bigger and smaller. There's a ton of facts that prove, okay, that this is a slit phenomenon. That's a surface phenomenon. The surfaces are completely controlling the mechanism. It has nothing to do with the idea of going through an opening. The stuff that goes through the opening goes in a dead straight line and lands on the surface, and that's what the gigantically bright maxima proves. Alright, so enough. God, I hate this planet of dishonest, lousy, religious, kooky, phantasmagorically butt fucked, brain dead, ass wipe shit. I hate it here. You people suck. You suck at thinking. You suck at everything. You suck at being honest. You suck at having any integrity. You suck at being able to do anything in some kind of way that isn't worse than a bug.